humanity had always been a mystery to the rest of the galaxy. Other species had charts showing the locations of human colonies, files describing their biology, and recordings of their ships, but none of that ever captured what made humans truly different. Aliens simply whispered a single word whenever the topic came up: Deathworlders. It sounded dramatic, even frightening, but it was not an insult. It was a fact born from the place humans came from: Earth, a world filled with storms, predators, diseases, and an environment that constantly tested its inhabitants. Any species that survived such a world naturally grew stronger, smarter, and tougher than most civilizations could imagine. Across the stars, intelligent societies joked nervously that humans could survive anything. They told stories of humans climbing frozen mountains for fun, exploring deep oceans, and living through disasters that would wipe out other species in seconds. Some species admired them from afar, while others stayed away out of fear. To them, humans were unpredictable, driven by emotions, full of bold ideas, and occasionally too brave for their own good. But one thing was always certain: if humans decided to help someone, they gave everything. If they decided to fight, they did not stop until the threat was gone. Meanwhile, far from Earth, the Varelian Alliance lived in peace. The Varelians were a gentle species who valued beauty, art, and harmony. Their people had soft silver skin, their cities glowed with blue lights, and their technology was elegant and efficient. They lived long lives and spent most of their time developing science, healing techniques, and peaceful exploration. For centuries they had almost no conflict. Their culture believed in kindness as a guiding principle. They trusted easily, forgave quickly, and avoided war at any cost. That nature made them admired throughout the galaxy, yet vulnerable. Their closest neighbors, the Krith Dominion, were the opposite of everything Varelians stood for. The Krith were a warlike species with sharp, angular features and rigid military discipline. For generations, they had conquered weaker worlds, enslaving populations and stripping planets for resources. They believed strength was the only true law, and anyone who could not defend themselves did not deserve to survive. The Varelians had always feared the Krith, but they tried to maintain treaties, hoping diplomacy would keep peace. Unfortunately, the Krith did not believe in peace. The first attack came without warning. Krith ships suddenly entered Varelian space, ignoring communication attempts and destroying border stations within minutes. The Varelian fleet, made for exploration rather than battle, fell back in panic. Their defense systems, designed mostly for emergencies and natural disasters, could not compete with the heavily armed Krith warships. In a matter of days, several Varelian colonies were captured. The cities were set on fire, families were separated, and entire transport lines collapsed. The Varelians were shocked, terrified, and overwhelmed. They sent messages to their few allies, but most were too far or too weak to help. The Varelian High Council gathered in their luminous hall, faces dim with fear. They had never experienced a crisis like this. A war with the Krith meant extinction. The council debated desperately for hours, searching for answers, until one ancient option was mentioned: a forgotten emergency signal system. Created centuries ago when the Alliance first joined the Galactic Network, the system could send a massive long-range SOS across unknown regions, beyond familiar star clusters. It was meant as a last resort. At first the idea seemed foolish. No one knew who might hear the signal. It could attract pirates, hostile civilizations, or even species worse than the Krith. But as the council members listened to the news of burning cities and lost colonies, they realized they had no other choice. The destruction was spreading too quickly. Their people were dying. Their civilization was collapsing. If help did not come soon, there would be no Varelian Alliance left to save. Inside a quiet, protected chamber, technicians activated the ancient device. A low hum filled the room as silver panels lit up with old symbols. The air felt heavy, as if the machine remembered its purpose. The lead technician hesitated for a moment, wondering if they were making a terrible mistake. But when he thought of the frightened families hiding in underground shelters and the desperate cries from captured colonies, his hands stopped trembling. He pressed the final activation key. Instantly, a powerful signal shot into the darkness of space. It carried a simple but heartbreaking message: "We are dying. We need help. Whoever you are, please save us." The signal traveled faster than light routes, skipping across communication relays and passing through regions where no Varelian ship had ever gone. It continued for hours, days, and eventually weeks, spreading farther than anything the Varelians had ever transmitted before. When the council received confirmation that the signal was active, they stood quietly, unsure whether to feel relief or dread. Some of them feared the unknown more than the Krith. Others prayed that anyone kind-hearted would hear their plea. What expected was that the signal would eventually reach humanity. On the far side of the galaxy, aboard a human military patrol ship named Resolute, the crew was conducting routine scans. The ship was sleek, matte black, built for long-range missions. Humans had a reputation for exploring dangerous regions just to chart them properly. Captain Armin Keller, a seasoned officer known for his calm nature, was reviewing reports when a communication officer suddenly frowned at her console. "Captain, I'm picking up something strange," she said. Keller walked over, expecting a glitch or static interference, but instead, he saw the distress signal pulsing across the screen. It was old in style, but filled with raw desperation. The captain ordered a translation. When the computer finished processing the message, everyone on the bridge fell silent. The message described a civilization under attack, their defenses failing, and millions of innocent lives at risk. It was a plea without pride or formality, just pure fear and hope. Keller knew enough about galactic politics to understand what they were dealing with. A species begging for help from whoever might hear them. Humanity had received similar messages in the past, usually from remote settlements or small outposts. But this one felt different. Something about it touched the crew deeply. They knew the tone of people in danger. They had heard it on disaster-struck Earth, in war zones, and in emergency broadcasts during human crises. The voices in the signal sounded the same, except these were not human. There was no hesitation in the crew's response. Humans might have been feared by many species, but they had always taken pride in helping those who could not help themselves. Their harsh homeworld had taught them empathy as much as strength. Captain Keller sent an immediate request to Earth's Central Command for evaluation. Within hours, Central Command analyzed the situation. The Varelian Alliance was not an enemy. They were peaceful, diplomatic, and important to the balance of the region. The Krith Dominion, on the other hand, was known for cruelty and aggression. If the Krith succeeded in wiping out the Varelians, more peaceful civilizations would likely fall next. Commanders gathered in a secure room on Earth, reviewing maps and intelligence. The decision was not easy. Deploying a fleet across such a long distance required enormous resources. It would reveal humanity's military strength to the galaxy. But humans had a deeply rooted belief that some actions mattered more than politics or fear. Saving lives was one of them. When the final vote was cast, the decision was unanimous. Humanity would answer. The SOS. Orders spread across human space. Ports lit up, ships prepared for launch, and soldiers were briefed on the mission. The fleet chosen for the task was one of humanity's most capable. Other species had rumors about its stories of unmatched firepower, advanced engines, and crews trained in the harshest conditions. Some even believed these ships were invincible. The truth was simpler. They were built by a species that refused to give up. As the fleet assembled, the Resolute received its orders. Captain Keller felt a surge of determination as he watched dozens of human warships appear on his displays. Each one represented thousands of the galaxy's most resilient beings. They were not going for conquest. They were going because someone had cried for help, and humanity could not stand aside. Back in Varelian space, the situation worsened every hour. Cities were burning, and the Krith were preparing for a final strike. The Varelian Council waited helplessly. Days passed with no answer, and hope began to crumble. Some believed that the SOS had failed. Others feared that whoever received it might be just as dangerous as the Krith. But in the cold vacuum of space, far beyond their vision, humanity had heard their call, and humanity was coming. The Varelians had always believed their peaceful nature would protect them. They trusted agreements, treaties, and diplomacy more than weapons. For thousands of years they lived in harmony, building shining cities filled with art, gardens, and soft glowing towers. Their days were slow and calm. Children played in floating parks, elders taught in open-air halls, and the idea of war existed only in history lessons. Even then, their teachers spoke of conflict with sadness, as if war was a disease that belonged to a different universe. Because of their gentle culture, most Varelians never learned how to fight. Their soldiers trained mostly for rescue missions and disaster response, not real battles. Their weapons were old-fashioned, designed for warning shots rather than destruction. Their ships were beautiful but thin and delicate, built to explore new stars, not survive explosions. It was a lovely way of living, but tragically unprepared for the darkness waiting just beyond their borders. The Krith Dominion had been watching them for years. The Krith admired strength and despised weakness. To them, peace was a sign of stupidity. They saw the Varelians not as neighbors, but as resources, planets to be harvested, people to be enslaved, technology to be stolen. When the Krith felt their empire needed expansion, their leaders chose the easiest target. The Varelians never even suspected it. The invasion began quietly. The first sign of danger came when a Varelian supply station near the border stopped responding. At first, the council believed it was a technical malfunction. Then a patrol ship sent to investigate also vanished without sending a single message. Confusion spread, but the Varelians still hesitated to think of war. They searched for friendly explanations, believing maybe pirates or some natural phenomenon caused the disappearances. But when the Krith finally attacked openly, there was no misunderstanding left. The Varelian border lit up with explosions. Their communication satellites were destroyed. Their outposts were invaded. Within hours, the Krith had captured the entire outer region. The Varelians sent desperate calls to negotiate, hoping the Krith would accept peace talks. But their messages were met only with mockery. The Varelian fleet scrambled to defend their worlds, but their ships were too fragile and too lightly armed. They were designed to travel long distances, collect data, and help in emergencies. not to face war cruisers 10 times their size. Their first military engagement ended in disaster. Entire crews were lost without even scratching the Krith ships. In the capital city, citizens gathered around huge screens watching the battle updates with wide, trembling eyes. Many could not believe what they were seeing. War was not supposed to happen to them, not here, not in their beautiful, gentle world. Families fled deeper into safer territories, but safety was disappearing quickly. The Krith moved fast, taking colony after colony. Thousands of Virelians were captured. Their peaceful communities were burned to force surrender. Refugee ships filled the space lanes, but many were caught and destroyed. The sense of panic was spreading like fire. Inside the Virelian High Council chamber, fear turned into helplessness. Council members argued over how to respond. Some wanted to surrender immediately, hoping the Krith might spare their population. Others wanted to keep resisting, believing surrender would only lead to slavery. A small group of elders remembered the ancient emergency signal device that could send a final plea for help. But they were afraid to use it. What if the wrong species heard them? What if the galaxy held something even worse than the Krith? Still, as they received more reports of burning cities and lost families, the debates grew more emotional. A council member named Solari, known for her calm wisdom, finally stood and addressed them. She spoke softly, but her voice carried across the chamber. She reminded them that their people were dying, and doing nothing was no longer an option. Even if the signal attracted a dangerous species, that future danger was still better than certain extinction now. Her words moved the entire room. The council voted with heavy hearts but with clarity. They would send the final SOS. As the signal traveled into space, hope flickered weakly among the Virelians. Some prayed it would reach someone good. Others feared it would reach no one at all. Days passed with no reply. The council focused on evacuation plans, pushing as many families as they could into underground shelters. The capital city prepared for siege. Even their sky, usually glowing with soft starlight, now carried the dark shadows of enemy ships. Colonies reported worsening conditions. The Krith were tightening their grip. They wanted the Virelians to surrender completely. They cut off food supplies, blocked transportation routes, and captured any ship that tried to escape. Many Virelians died, not from weapons, but from starvation, exhaustion, and hopelessness. The peaceful population, unused to violence of any kind, felt the emotional weight of destruction crushing them. Some had never even seen a gun before. Now they saw laser fire almost every day. In one colony, a small group of Virelian scientists hid inside a damaged research station, listening to Krith soldiers marching outside. They whispered to each other about the SOS. They tried to guess what kind of species would hear it. One young scientist imagined a powerful but kind civilization coming to save them. An older scientist whispered a darker thought. What if they had invited something even more terrifying than the Krith? But at that moment, terrifying or not, any force strong enough to challenge the Krith felt like a miracle. Meanwhile, the Krith believed they had already won. Their commanders celebrated each victory, planning how to divide the Virelian territory among themselves. They laughed at the weak resistance and sent mocking broadcasts to the Virelian Council demanding unconditional surrender. But despite everything, the Virelians refused to give up. Their hearts were soft, but their faith in survival was strong. They had built a civilization based on love and trust, and they would protect their last remaining people with everything they had left. The Krith grew impatient. They wanted to finish the war quickly so they could move on to their next target. They prepared a massive assault fleet aimed directly at the Virelian homeworld. Their strategy was simple: destroy the capital city, shatter the council, and force the population into submission. If the Virelians did not surrender after that, the Krith planned to wipe out their species entirely in the capital. Everyone felt the approaching doom. Civilians rushed to underground shelters. Medical teams prepared supplies. The small Virelian defense force braced themselves with trembling hands. Their weapons were old, their shields weak, but their determination was strong. Parents hugged their children tight, promising them that everything would somehow be okay, even though they did not know if they would survive the next day. The council waited in their protected chamber, listening to updates from scouts describing the Krith fleet approaching like a dark storm. The tension was so thick it felt like the air itself had stopped moving. Several council members silently regretted not building a stronger military long ago. Others whispered prayers. Solari sat with her hands clasped tightly, staring at a glowing crystal map of their star system, watching enemy icons creeping closer. In the middle of this growing despair, some Virelians wondered again about the SOS. Had anyone heard it? Was help on the way? Could any species cross such a great distance in time? Those were the questions that kept hope alive. Children in the shelters asked their parents who might come to save them. Their parents answered with forced smiles. No one knew the truth. No one knew if rescue was even possible, but far away, so far that the Virelians could not imagine the distance. Humanity had already made its decision. The Deathworlders had intercepted the cry for help. The humans, with their rugged determination and fearsome technology, were preparing for something the galaxy rarely saw them do: enter a war they did not start, for a people they had never met. As the Virelians waited for the incoming Krith assault, They had no idea that an enormous human fleet was already cutting through space at incredible speed. They did not know that hundreds of human engineers were running final checks on weapons. They did not know that soldiers in armored suits were boarding dropships. They did not know that Earth had committed one of its strongest armadas to save them. The only thing the Varelians knew was fear and a tiny spark of hope born from a message they had sent into the darkness. That hope, small as it was, kept them steady as they prepared for the worst moment in their history. None of them could imagine what was coming, or how drastically their lives were about to change. They had reached out blindly, desperate for salvation, never expecting who would answer or what kind of force would be unleashed on their behalf. But humanity was already on its way, and the galaxy was about to learn that when Deathworlders heard a cry for help, they did not ignore it. They moved with power, purpose, and a fire that burned brighter than fear. The human ship Resolute moved through deep space like a silent arrow, but inside it, the atmosphere buzzed with energy. Ever since the Varelian SOS had been decoded, the mood on the ship had shifted from quiet routine to intense determination. Every crew member felt the weight of the message. They knew innocent lives depended on them. Even though the Varelians were strangers, their fear had reached into every human heart aboard the ship. Humans understood fear. They understood loss. They understood what it felt like to be attacked without warning. That shared understanding created a powerful fire inside them, one that pushed them to act with purpose. Captain Armin Keller stood near the main display, watching the holographic map update with new data. His sharp eyes followed the blinking route markers that indicated the path the fleet would take. Keller had been in dangerous missions before, from asteroid belt rescues to deep space battles, but this time felt different. This time an entire civilization depended on the fleet arriving in time. He felt the weight of leadership pressing down on him, but he didn't waver. Humans were at their best when facing impossible odds. Across the bridge, officers worked quickly. Engineers ran simulations, checking whether the engines could handle prolonged high-speed travel. Communications staff monitored channels for updates from Earth. Weapons specialists inspected and rechecked the systems that controlled the ship's cannons and missile bays. The entire crew worked with disciplined urgency. Nobody complained. Nobody hesitated. They all wanted the same thing: to reach the Varelians before it was too late. Soon the rest of the human fleet gathered behind the Resolute. Dozens of ships emerged from hyperspace one after another, like planets forming around a star. Some were giant carriers capable of launching hundreds of fighters. Others were destroyers equipped with advanced weapons. There were medical ships, supply ships, and tactical command cruisers. Together, they created a massive armada, one strong enough to take on almost any threat in the galaxy. To outsiders, the fleet looked terrifying. Dark armored hulls covered in angular plates, engines glowing like angry fire, bold symbols of Earth and the human union painted proudly across every ship. Other species whispered that humans built their vessels like beasts, dangerous, powerful, and impossible to ignore. But humans didn't build them for intimidation. They built them for survival. Every ship represented centuries of learning how to protect themselves in an unpredictable universe. The moment the fleet was ready, the command came through: initiate long-distance warp. The stars stretched into bright lines as the fleet jumped forward at incredible speed, crossing vast distances in moments. During the journey, the crew members trained harder than usual. Soldiers practiced zero-gravity combat in the training chambers. Pilots ran flight simulations. Medics prepared emergency kits. Even the scientists gathered in groups to plan how to help the Varelians recover once the crisis was over. Humans didn't just plan to fight the Krith, they planned to rebuild the worlds the Krith had destroyed. While the fleet raced forward, Captain Keller spent hours studying the data transmitted by the Varelians. He watched their cities burning on the recordings, saw families running, watched ships explode under Krith fire. Each new video strengthened his resolve. He imagined what Earth would feel like under such an assault, and that made his voice even more steady when he spoke to his crew. He reminded them they were not going into battle for glory or power. They were going because someone needed help. At the same time, Keller knew the Krith Dominion was not like the enemies humans had fought before. The Krith were ruthless and highly organized. Their ships were armored heavily, and their soldiers were trained from childhood to believe in domination. They hated weakness, and they admired brutality. Humans would need to be smart and careful, not just strong. Back in Varelian territory, the situation grew worse each day. The Varelians' failing defenses could barely slow the Krith conquest. Entire regions were being destroyed. Families searched for shelter, but safety was disappearing quickly. In many cities, the sky had turned black from smoke. Varelian leaders sent desperate messages to one another, trying to coordinate evacuations, but most communication lines had been cut. The council itself barely held together, constantly receiving heartbreaking updates about the fall of their worlds. Among the refugees hiding underground, rumors spread about the SOS. Some whispered hopeful stories about a heroic species coming to save them. Others feared no one had heard the message. A few believed it was pointless, no one could arrive in time. Yet even the smallest spark of hope was precious. Parents comforted their children by telling them that help might be on the way. Elderly Varelians told stories about ancient legends where heroes arrived from distant stars. Hope, even fragile hope, kept them standing. Meanwhile, Krith commanders celebrated their victories with cold satisfaction. They believed the Varelians were moments away from collapse. Their leader, General Vorak, issued an order to prepare for the final assault on the Varelian homeworld. Vorak was known throughout the Dominion as one of the most ruthless strategists. He enjoyed breaking civilizations and saw the Varelians as nothing more than insects. His plan was simple: crush the capital city, eliminate the council, and force the population into slavery. He wanted the Varelians to suffer before they submitted. But as Vorak prepared for his final attack, his analysts detected unusual energy signatures far out in deep space. At first they believed it was debris or natural space phenomena. But soon, the readings grew stronger. Krith scanners picked up multiple warp signatures, approaching at incredible speed, faster than any species in that region could travel. The readings confused the Krith officers. The signals looked like military ships, but the power levels were higher than anything they had seen before. Vorak demanded answers, but his technicians could only offer guesses. One young officer suggested it might be a rogue faction or a pirate army. Another thought it might be a system glitch. The idea that a powerful rescue fleet was coming never crossed their minds. They believed they were invincible. In the capital city, the Varelian High Council was receiving grim updates. Enemy forces were moving into position. Their last defensive line was breaking. The council had already told civilians to prepare for the worst. They expected death or capture within hours. Some council members wept quietly. Others sat in numb silence. Solari, the wise elder who had supported sending the SOS, closed her eyes and whispered a prayer not for herself, but for her people. Just as despair was settling heavily in the room, an alarm sounded in the communication chamber. A technician rushed forward, his voice trembling with shock. He announced that long-range scanners were detecting unknown ships entering the sector. The council froze. They waited for confirmation, afraid to hope again. The readings repeated multiple warships of unknown design approaching the system. Some council members feared the worst, believing a new enemy had arrived. Others dared to hope the impossible. The SOS had been heard. Solari felt her heart pounding. Her hands trembled. She believed with every part of her soul that this was the answer they had prayed for. She stood from her seat, her voice soft but firm, telling the others that hope had returned. Before they could respond, the technician shouted again. The scans had identified the ships. They were human. The council chamber erupted with emotion. Some cried in relief. Some stared in disbelief. Others fell to their knees, overwhelmed. The humans, legendary Deathworlders known across the galaxy for surviving the harshest conditions, were coming in space. The human fleet emerged from warp. Stars snapped back into focus. The black shapes of the massive ships filled the void. Their engines glowed like white fire. Their weapons systems hummed with power. Immediately, human scanners detected the Krith forces attacking Varelian planets. The moment the fleet arrived, Captain Keller issued the command that his crew had been preparing for since the SOS reached them: lock weapons, prepare fighters, and form a defensive shield around the Varelian homeworld. His voice echoed through every ship. Humanity had arrived, and they would stand between the Krith and their victims. Inside the Krith command ship, panic rippled through the ranks. Officers shouted reports at one another. Vorak nearly crushed a console in fury. His scanners now clearly showed the identities of the incoming ships. The worst possible species had responded to the SOS. Not pirates, not rogues, not a weak ally Deathworlders. Vorak snarled orders to prepare for battle, but fear flickered in his eyes. That Krith had fought many enemies, but they had never faced humans. Meanwhile, in the Varelian shelters, citizens felt tremors beneath their feet. They heard distant explosions. Many feared the capital was under attack again. But when the emergency screens flickered to life, showing human ships entering orbit, a wave of hope washed through every tunnel and bunker. Children cheered. Adults cried openly. Strangers hugged each other. For the first time in months, joy filled the air. Above the planet, the human fleet positioned itself between the Krith forces and the defenseless Varel. The Krith prepared to fire. The humans prepared to respond. It was a moment suspended in time, one side full of cruelty, the other full of determination. The rising conflict had reached its peak. The battle was about to begin. The moment the message from the alien ship fully translated. Every human in the command deck felt the pressure in the air change. Something about the quiet, trembling tone of those 3 words "they have come" cut through the room like cold wind. Admiral Rhea didn't say anything at first. She simply stared at the drifting alien vessel on the main screen, watching the faint blue glow around its hull flicker unevenly. It looked less like a starship and more like a dying lantern. The alien representative, Kelter, appeared again on the hologram. His hands shook, his breathing was shallow, and his voice seemed tired in a way humans rarely witnessed from advanced species. He spoke slowly, clearly choosing each word with care so nothing would be misunderstood. He said that the enemy, the ones who destroyed their worlds, broke their fleets, and hunted their species across star systems, had arrived. Not arriving soon, not detected far away. Arrived already here. His people had run from them for decades, fleeing from arm to arm of the galaxy, sacrificing home after home just to survive one more year. Every escape left them weaker, fewer, and more terrified. Now that running had ended. The enemy had caught up not just to destroy them, but to finish the last surviving fragment of their civilization. The humans on the fleet did not panic. Deathworlders rarely did, but even they felt a weight settle in their chests. It was one thing to prepare for battle. It was another to realize the thing coming toward. You had wiped out tens of billions without slowing down. General Harlan leaned forward, his voice steady but serious, and asked Kelthor what exactly was approaching them. The alien's answer was not a number, not the size of a fleet, not a list of weapons. It was a story. The story of a species humans had never heard of, a species not driven by conquest, resource hunger, or strategy. They destroyed because they believed they were chosen to purify life, a fanatical force with impossible ships, terrifying technology, and no concept of mercy. Kelthor said their weapons could slice cities into dust and explode atmosphere layers. Their soldiers didn't tire, didn't negotiate, didn't retreat. They were raised from birth to serve one purpose: remove all species they deemed impure from existence. In the silence that followed, the humans didn't show fear. Instead, something else stirred inside them, a fierce, protective instinct that alien species often misunderstood. Humans simply did not react to threat the way others did. Where most ran, humans planted their feet. Where most negotiated, humans prepared to punch back. Even Kelthor paused as he witnessed the change in their expressions. He had seen fear in 1,000 forms, but he had never seen anger mixed with determination. Quite like this, the alien fleet sent a direct transmission only moments later. Not a warning, an announcement. They declared that the presence of humanity did not matter. Anyone who sheltered the fleeing species would face the same fate. Humanity, to them, was an obstacle, not a threat. That declaration became the breaking point. Not for the aliens, for the humans. Rhea stood from her command chair, straightening her uniform as the enormous holographic map of the incoming fleet expanded in front of her. She wasn't calm. She wasn't smiling. She looked like someone who had made a decision she would carry to the end, no matter what it cost. She turned to her officers and told them to prepare every ship, every weapon system, every pilot. No hesitation, no retreat, no surrender. For years, humanity had been labeled by other galactic civilizations as dangerous, unpredictable, and too aggressive. But in moments like these, that reputation turned into something useful, something necessary. Fearless. The alien enemy arrived through a tear in space, bright, violent, blinding. Their ships came out in perfect formation, like blades sliding from a sheath. They were sleek, silver, and enormous, covered in symbols carved into their hulls like holy markings. Even from a distance they radiated something cold and merciless. Their engines didn't roar, they hummed like some monstrous living organism. Kelthor stepped back, trembling. His people had nightmares of those ships. To him, they were not machines, they were monsters, wrapped in metal. Humanity saw something different. Targets. The enemy hailed the human flagship. Their leader appeared, tall, armored, and terrifying in an unnatural way. His face was hidden behind a mask shaped like a skull. He introduced himself not with a name, but with a title, Harbinger of Cleansing. He demanded that humanity step aside. He demanded they hand over the last surviving refugees. He demanded obedience. Admiral Rhea didn't give him a speech. She simply leaned forward, narrowed her eyes, and told him something that made Kelthor gasp in shock. No, the Harbinger didn't threaten. He didn't warn. He simply replied, "Then you will be erased with them." The transmission cut. The battlefield came alive instantly. Thousands of enemy fighters launched from their carriers, streaking toward the human fleet like a storm of shining daggers. Their massive dreadnoughts charged their weapons, glowing with a cruel light that promised devastation. Their formation tightened with precision, demonstrating centuries of mastery in extermination warfare. But humanity was not frozen. In seconds, Deathworlder ships moved like a single organism. Engines roared, shields activated, cannons unfolded like wings of fire. Every pilot trained through harsh environments and deadly terrain jumped into battle without fear or doubt. Kale Tar watched something he had never seen before, humans rushing toward danger instead of away from it. The first clash shook the entire region of space. Human vessels slammed into the enemy line with overwhelming force. Their weapons didn't match alien beauty or precision. Human engineering had always been shaped by survival instincts, raw, powerful, and incredibly destructive. Explosions lit up the darkness as the two fleets collided. One enemy ship fired a purification beam, intending to erase a human cruiser in a single shot. Instead, the cruiser dodged with a maneuver considered suicidal by most species. The crew forced their ship into a near spin, passing the beam by inches. They retaliated with a full plasma barrage that tore the alien ship open from the inside. Another human destroyer charged straight through a formation of fighters, using its armor to ram aside smaller ships before unleashing a shockwave blast that vaporized the entire cluster. Kelthor had told them his people never stood a chance against the enemy. Now he watched as humans not only stood but pushed back still. The enemy was massive. Their numbers were overwhelming, their strategy flawless. They advanced, using brutal efficiency, cutting through the outer layers of the human fleet. A dreadnought fired a planet-cracker weapon that barely missed one of the refugee vessels. The shockwave alone shook the bridge where Rhea stood. A nearby human frigate took the hit instead, sacrificing itself intentionally to shield the refugees. Kelthor cried out as he watched the ship explode, but the humans didn't pause. They didn't break formation. Sacrifice was part of their resolve. The enemy advanced harder. The humans pushed back harder. Every second of the battle felt like a lifetime. Every loss felt heavy. Every victory felt earned. And through it all, Rhea watched the battlefield with sharp eyes, calculating, adjusting, responding instantly to every shift. But when the enemy dreadnoughts powered up for a synchronized purification, strike one that could wipe out the entire center of the human fleet, Rhea knew this was the true breaking point, not the fear. The decision. She ordered the Deathworlder flagship forward directly toward the dreadnought line. Her crew didn't question. Her humans never feared impossible odds. They had evolved on a planet that tried to kill them every day. They had survived extinction-level disasters, wars, and nature itself. Their instinct, deep in their bones, told them something simple. If someone threatens your home, your people, or your allies, you fight, even if the universe itself tells you to run. Kale Tar watched in disbelief as Rhea's ship charged alone toward the largest enemy vessels, its engines burning bright, weapons firing non-stop. The dreadnoughts turned everything on her. Missiles, gravitational weapons, but she kept going, slicing through the fire like a burning blade. This was not bravery. This was defiance, and it changed everything. The rest of the human fleet saw her daring charge and surged forward with renewed fury. Fighters sped past her ship like a storm, blasting holes in the enemy formation. Destroyers followed, launching torpedoes that ripped apart enemy shields. Even damaged ships rallied behind her, refusing to fall back. The enemy had expected fear. They had found humanity, and in that moment, Kelthor understood why other alien civilizations whispered about them, why they were called death, why their presence in the galaxy made even powerful empires uneasy. It wasn't because humans were cruel. It was because humans refused to surrender, especially when someone needed their help. The breaking point wasn't the enemy's arrival, it was the moment humanity decided the galaxy would not lose another species, not while they were still breathing. And as the flagship slammed into the heart of the dreadnought fleet, firing everything it had, the battle reached a level of intensity the enemy had never expected from a primitive death world species. They thought they were unstoppable. They had never faced humans before. The battlefield burned with light from thousands of explosions, like stars being born and dying in the same breath. Every direction held chaos. Human ships and enemy warships clashed with violent force, each trying to break the other. Space itself looked like a storm of fire and metal. But through that storm, the human flagship kept pushing forward, refusing to fall, refusing to stop. Admiral Rhea stood at the front of the bridge, gripping the edge of the control panel as tremors shook the entire ship. The dreadnoughts surrounding them fired non-stop. Every impact made the deck rumble under her feet. Sparks burst from damaged walls. Warning lights flashed red across every screen. Yet Rhea's expression stayed firm, sharp, determined. She could feel fear deep inside her somewhere, but she locked it away. She didn't have time for fear, not now, not when so many lives depended on her. Her officers scrambled around her, calling out damage reports. Hull at 40%, main shield collapsing, weapons overheating. These were the kinds of warnings that usually made commanders order a retreat. But Rhea knew that if humanity retreated, the enemy would wipe out the refugee ships instantly. And if those ships died, the last hope of an entire species would die with them. So instead of retreating, she shouted for her crew to brace themselves and drive forward even harder. The enemy dreadnoughts seemed confused. Their doctrine expected fear, expected collapse. They expected beings to kneel or flee. But humanity did neither. Humanity attacked harder, faster, and with more fury than anything the enemy had prepared for. That humans were outnumbered, outgunned, and in worse condition. Yet they were the ones advancing. Still on the command ship, watched with trembling hands, unable to understand how the humans were still fighting. His species had faced the enemy before, and they had always fallen. Every time, he had grown up hearing stories of the Harbinger's shadows that swallowed worlds whole. Monsters wrapped in metal, gods of destruction. Watching humans defy them felt like watching ordinary people punch the sky and make it bleed. On the enemy flagship, the Harbinger of Cleansing watched the human charge with what seemed like disbelief. His mask didn't show emotion, but his voice did. He ordered his generals to cut the humans down, to crush their fleet, to burn every ship until no debris remained. He believed that overwhelming force would break humanity like it had shattered so many others. He was wrong. Humanity did not break, and in that moment, something changed in the battle. The humans found the enemy's rhythm. The alien fleet fought like a perfect machine, strict formation, predictable moves, synchronized timing. But that perfection also made them rigid. Humans, on the other hand, fought with creativity. They took risks. They improvised. They did reckless things that no enemy commander could predict because no logical species would attempt them. A human frigate, almost destroyed, suddenly flipped its orientation and crashed through to enemy fighters, before firing its last remaining torpedoes directly into the weak point of a dreadnought, blowing it apart. Another small corvette shut down its own heat signature, pretending to be wreckage, then launched a surprise attack that took out an entire enemy squadron. These were not actions found in tactical manuals. These were actions born from human instinct. The Harbinger's voice rose with anger as he watched his perfect formation begin to crumble under the chaos of human strategy. He ordered more ships forward, more fire, more destruction, but the humans responded with equal intensity, and for the first time, the enemy force slowed just a little, but enough for Admiral Rhea to notice. She called out for the fleet to focus all fire on the dreadnought, directly ahead of her flagship, the largest one, the one powering the enemy's central purification array. If that dreadnought fell, the enemy's strongest weapon would die with it. Every human ship that could still fight changed course at the same moment. It was like watching thousands of ships move with one heartbeat. Fighters swarmed toward the dreadnought like angry sparks. Destroyers unleashed missiles so quickly that they looked like glowing rain. The enemy tried to defend it, forming walls of ships, but the humans punched through those walls with unstoppable force. The dreadnought retaliated with a massive beam that hit one of the human battleships. The blast tore it apart, bright light, then drifting metal fragments. It was a brutal loss, and the fleet felt it. But instead of slowing the humans down, it only made them fight harder. Admiral Rhea shouted for full power. Her flagship surged forward, pushing its damaged engines to their limit. Parts of the hull glowed from overheating. The shields were almost gone, but the flagship didn't slow. She aimed the bow of her ship directly at the huge enemy vessel, preparing for a move that even her crew didn't fully understand yet. Keltha stared with wide, horrified eyes. He asked if she was going to ram the dreadnought. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence said everything. Her crew understood too, and none of them tried to stop her. But the plan wasn't suicide, not completely. As they charged, Rhea ordered every remaining fighter to attack the dreadnought's lower flank. She ordered every artillery ship to fire at its exposed heating vents. She ordered every surviving destroyer to hit its shield generator at once. It wasn't one attack, it was a coordinated storm, and it worked. The dreadnought's shields flickered, then broke with a visible shatter of energy. The moment the shields collapsed, Rhea gave the final order: fire everything. Every cannon, every rifle, every missile, every last onboard weapon that hadn't burned out yet. A storm of fire erupted from the flagship, hitting the dreadnought at full force. Cracks spread across its armor like glowing scars. Fire burst from its sides. Its engines flickered. Its enormous form started to shake violently. Then, with a deafening explosion that lit up space like a new sun, the dreadnought shattered. The shockwave slammed into every surrounding ship. The enemy formation broke apart. Their coordination fell into chaos. Even the Harbinger's own ship reeled from the force for the first time in recorded history. One of their primary dreadnoughts had been destroyed. Humanity done what no other species ever achieved. The Harbinger roared in fury, ordering his entire fleet to annihilate the humans at any cost. But without their command dreadnought, their fleet's telepathic coordination faltered. Ships hesitated. Timings were off. They made small errors, just small ones, but in battle, small mistakes grow into huge weaknesses, and humans saw those weaknesses instantly. The tide turned. Human destroyers cut through enemy fighter swarms. Human cruisers coordinated long-range artillery that ripped through enemy lines. Refugee ships, protected at the center, remained untouched as the human fleet formed a defensive wall around them. Keltha watched as the impossible happened. For the first time in long years, the enemy was no longer advancing. They were falling back. The Harbinger tried one last desperate attack, sending his own flagship charging toward Rhea's ship in a final attempt to crush her and break human morale. But Rhea had already anticipated the move. She ordered her fleet to scatter, creating an opening. Then she fired a targeted EMP blast directly at the Harbinger's propulsion core. The enemy flagship jerked violently. Its engine sputtered. Its nose dipped forward. It began to spin, helpless and vulnerable. Human ships wasted no time. They fired everything they had left. The Harbinger's flagship was consumed by light, torn apart from within before erupting into a massive explosion. The shockwave echoed through space. Far weaker than the first dreadnought blast, but symbolically far more powerful. The heart of the enemy fleet had just died. The remaining enemy ships, once fearless, once unstoppable, broke formation and fled. They didn't retreat with discipline. They ran wildly, desperately, like creatures who had just realized they were not gods after all. Humanity did not chase them. They had won. Silence slowly spread across the battlefield, replacing the roars of war. Burning debris drifted quietly. Ships powered down their weapons. Pilots sighed or cried or laughed in relief. On the flagship's bridge, the crew slumped in their chairs, exhausted but alive. Admiral Rhea closed her eyes for a moment, not to rest but to breathe. For the first time since the enemy arrived, she allowed herself that small, human moment. Kelther broke down in tears, not of fear, but of overwhelming relief. He turned to Rhea, voice shaking, and thanked her, not just for protecting his people, but for proving something he had never believed possible. The enemy could be defeated. The battle was over. Humanity had won a victory no one had ever dreamed of, but the galaxy was far from safe. That and every survivor on that battlefield understood that this victory was not the end, it was only the beginning. The battlefield slowly drifted into silence as the last enemy ship disappeared into the distant darkness. No more explosions, no more alarms, no more screams or frantic commands. Only the quiet hum of damaged engines and the soft crackling of broken systems remained. For a long moment it didn't feel real. After everything, the fear, the chaos, the unending attacks, it felt strange to stand in a world where the battle was finally over. Admiral Rhea looked out from the bridge window, her eyes tired but steady. The stars looked different now, calmer, like the galaxy itself was taking a deep breath. Her flagship floated among the scattered debris, moving slowly through the aftermath. Pieces of metal drifted past, some from enemy ships, some heartbreakingly from human vessels that had sacrificed themselves. The lights flickered as damaged wiring strained to keep working. The air tasted like burnt circuits. But despite all this, the ship was still alive. Her crew walked around with slow, heavy steps, not because they were afraid, but because their bodies were exhausted. Many had not slept for almost 2 days. Some sat in their seats, shaking not with fear, but with the sudden release of adrenaline that had fueled them for so long. Others wiped tears from their eyes as they thought of friends who hadn't survived. Losing people in battle was something no amount of training could prepare anyone for. Kelther stood near the main console, unsure how to behave. Relief, grief, gratitude, shock, everything crashed inside him at once. His species had faced destruction for so long that hope felt like a forgotten language. But now, seeing the humans still standing after fighting a monster his people could never defeat, he felt something powerful rise inside him. It was small, fragile, but growing. Hope taught. He watched as human engineers rushed to assist damaged ships. Fighters flew in slow formation, guiding refugees to safer positions. Rescue crews moved through the battlefield, searching for escape pods, scanning for survivors, saving anyone who could still be saved. Humanity had won, but instead of celebrating victory, they focused first on protection, on helping, on making sure no one was left behind. Kelther walked to Admiral Rhea slowly, his legs trembling. When he stood before her, he tried to speak, but the words got stuck in his throat. Finally, after a long struggle, he managed to whisper a simple truth that no member of his species had ever lived long enough to imagine a future after the enemy. His entire life had been shaped by fear and running. He had no memory of a world without their shadow. And now, for the first time, he found himself standing in a moment where their shadow had been pushed back. He told Rhea that she had given his people something they had not held in generations. Time. Time to rebuild. Time to breathe. Time to live. Rhea didn't say anything dramatic in response. She didn't give a grand speech. She just placed a hand gently on his shoulder, offering comfort in a quiet, human way. That simple gesture meant more than any heroic line ever could. It was the kind of kindness that confused other species' kindness in the middle of destruction. Kindness given freely, with no expectation of anything in return. Outside the flagship, human marines boarded damaged enemy wrecks, searching for intel, not out of cruelty, but because they needed to understand the enemy better. Humanity had defeated them today, but no one believed they were gone forever. The Harbinger was dead, but others would rise. That enemy civilization was vast, powerful, and fully committed to their twisted belief. Today had been a victory, but tomorrow could bring another battle. Generals across the fleet began sending reports, damage assessments, casualty lists, weapon statuses. It took hours to collect everything because the fleet had been pushed to its limits. Many ships were close to falling apart. Many crews had suffered heavy losses. But even with all the pain, the numbers showed something incredible. Far more humans had survived than expected. Against impossible odds, they had held the line. When news spread that the enemy had fled, several crews broke into cheers. Some hugged each other with shaky arms. Some cried openly. Some simply slumped against the walls, letting their bodies finally rest. A few recorded messages to send back home, telling their families they were alive. Others wrote last words for those who hadn't made it, promising their memories would not be forgotten. In the center of the fleet, the refugee ships slowly opened their communication channels. Their voices were filled with emotion so strong that even the translators struggled to keep up. They thanked humanity repeatedly, their gratitude honest and overwhelming. They spoke of how they expected to die, how they expected to vanish into history, how they expected every remaining piece of their culture to fade away. But because of the humans, because of this strange, stubborn, terrifying, wonderful species, they now had a reason to hope again. Kelther asked Rhea what humanity would do next. Her answer was simple. They would escort the refugees to a safe world. They would help them rebuild. They would form a council to study the enemy and prepare for their return. Humanity had just entered a war they didn't start, but they would not walk away from it. That wasn't their nature. She explained that humans had a saying, "If you want peace, prepare for war." And now the galaxy understood why. Another saying came to Kelthor's mind as he watched the humans work. Humans are dangerous allies. He now understood the deeper meaning. Humans were dangerous because of their compassion, their loyalty, their unbreakable spirit. Once they decided to protect someone, they fought with a force that could shake the stars. Rhea walked through the ship later, checking on her crew. Some saluted her weakly, others simply nodded, too tired to stand but unwilling to sleep until she passed by. She stopped to comfort a young officer who was crying quietly over the loss of her brother's ship. She thanked mechanics who kept engines running under impossible conditions. She praised pilots who had fought until their hands bled. She looked every wounded soldier in the eye, letting them know their pain was seen, their bravery recognized. Finally, when she returned to her quarters, she sat down heavily. The silence felt heavy, almost too loud. She removed her gloves, saw the cuts and bruises on her hands, and leaned back with a long exhale. The weight of everything, the fear, the decisions, the sacrifices hit her all at once, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to close her eyes, but only for a moment. She couldn't rest fully, not yet. There was still work to do. There were still survivors to help, still messages to send, still supplies to organize. The battle was over, but the responsibilities of a leader were not. She opened her eyes again and looked at the star map on her desk. The enemy territory glowed in red, far beyond the battle zone. It stretched across systems like a spreading poison. Humanity had wounded them today, but they had not ended them. They would return, stronger, angrier, more prepared. But humanity would be ready too. Across the fleet, repairs continued through the night. Refugees were moved to medical ships. Temporary memorials were set up for the fallen. Stories of bravery echoed through every corridor. One pilot who had crashed his fighter into an enemy cruiser survived inside an escape pod and was now being hailed as a hero. A medic who dragged 20 injured crew members through burning corridors became a symbol of courage. A young communications officer who decoded the last enemy transmission helped save thousands of lives. These stories spread quickly, each one turning into a spark of hope. KL single quotes Tar sent a message to his own people, telling them they were safe for now. He described humanity in a way no one in his species had ever done. He told them that humans were not just warriors, not just survivors, not just Deathworlders, they were protectors. He ended his message with something he had heard humans say, "You are not alone anymore." For his people, those words were almost holy. Later, Rhea gathered her commanders for one final meeting. She looked at each of them and said something that stayed with every person in that room. She said that the galaxy had spent years calling humans unpredictable, unstable, violent. She said that many species feared humanity because of how fiercely they fought. But after this battle, she believed the galaxy would finally understand the truth. Humans did not fight because they loved war. They fought because they refused to let evil win. They fought because someone had to stand between darkness and the innocent. They fought because strength meant nothing if it wasn't used to protect others. The commanders nodded, exhausted but proud. The war ahead would be long, but humanity would not face it alone. For the first time in history, another species would stand beside them, not out of fear, but out of trust. As the fleet prepared to jump to safer space, Kelthor stood at the window, watching the stars shimmer. He whispered quietly, saying that the universe had been saved by the very species others once called dangerous, and he realized something profound. Humanity wasn't dangerous because they were strong. Humanity was dangerous because they cared, and in a galaxy filled with cruelty, nothing was more powerful or more frightening than compassion. Backed by courage, with engines powering up and hope filling the air, the fleet slowly turned toward a new future, one shaped not by fear and destruction, but by unity, resilience, and the unbreakable will of a species that refused to ever let darkness win. The war had just begun, but so had a new era, and humanity would face it standing tall.